Good morning, everybody. Before I begin, I just want to mention that we have the shiur every Chol HaMoed, which we have to have because Chol HaMoed is my father's Yarhzeit. On the other hand, sometimes when you come into a Yarhzeit shiur, it might evoke certain feelings that are not necessarily consistent with Simchas Yontif. So, which you can ask the same question about Yizkor also when we do Yizkor on Yontif. And then a number of years ago, I forgot how many years ago it was, I was on the day of the Yarhzeit. So here in this country, and Ramah brings down a little bit. We always people like to go on a tiyul, whether it's to a park. So the day of the Yarhzeit, usually I spend the morning at home, a little learning. Then we go on a tiyul, and in this country, Baruch Hashem, it's never a problem to find a minyan for mincha because everyone wants everyone wants to daven. Even though I have to tell you, I had a very big challenge this Tuesday, but I found a minyan, but it was hard. Today, what I've done in the past few years is I don't leave until Mincha Gedol. I make a minyan in my shul in Ramat Beit Shemesh. But we spent the day in Park Herzliya, and it was amazing. There was nobody there besides my family. Nobody there. So I figured we'll go across the street, and we'll make a minyan across the street. I go across the street. There's nobody there to look like I want to daven. And at this point, I was getting a little nervous. Of course, I could hop on a train and go to Itzkut Bnei Brak. It's not a big deal, but I didn't want to do that. And all of a sudden, we passed by a Hasidic family, an Anglo family. They sounded like they were from England, and they were taking pictures. And then they said, okay, after this picture, we're davening mincha. I said, oh. So I said, can I join your minyan? He said, for sure. And then I said, I'm a chiyuv, so it's okay if I daven. And I said, for sure. So then I guess the father said, like a real Hasidic yid could say, what a wonderful yontif, he says. Here we are in the park as a family. We're taking pictures, and we're mincha together, and we even have a chiyuv to daven. So then he felt maybe that was a little inappropriate that he said that. So he turns because as a chiyuv that means that someone passed away. So he apologized and says, maybe I shouldn't have said that. It's a good way of a chiyuv. So I said, I forgot. Maybe I think it was the 12th Yarhzeit, the 13th Yarhzeit. I said, my father passed away 12 years ago, and the Yarhzeits today are really devoted to thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They had such wonderful parents. My father, my mother, as Rav Goldenhurst mentioned, really, and I thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And as my brother spoke about the Chivas HaTorah, that he gave over the Chivas HaTorah, and I try on some level, hopefully, to pass that on to the next generation. I would just mention that this summer, I had a newfound respect for my father. I knew my father was on Gadol, people knew about him, but I didn't realize till this summer how many people knew about him. So I happened to have spent with my wife and one of my children about 6 days in Budapest. Okay, so I went to Minyan every day, and I learned that you go to a shul and you see a Rav, you should always go over to the Rav and say hello. But I have a challenge because then they ask you your name, and you say your name is Chayim Soloveichik, and it sounds like you're trying to show off that you're Soloveichik. So I always have a challenge doing that. But so I didn't say anything. And then the Thursday night that I was there was a siyum, I believe, in Maseches Erechim, Mincha Ma'ariv, and I listened to the Rav give a shiur between Mincha Ma'ariv and Yiddish. I think I understand what he said, and had an aura to say. So now that I had an aura to give him, I felt okay. There's what to talk about. Went over to him, and I said, I told him my name, and I said I heard from my father, or whatever I was speaking about. He said, who is your father? And I said, and by the way, the feeling I don't know if anyone ever been to Budapest, but I felt like I was in a European shtetl, not in Eretz Yisrael, not in American European shtetl. So he says to me, I said, Aharon Soloveichik. Wow, starts talking, and then he takes me to introduce me to the members of his kehillah, and he tells the name. These are Hungarian Jews. Some of them can't speak English, right? And he tells them who my father was, and they all understood. So I realized that my father's name, really, I guess I would say, went into all Ashkenazi circles. The reason I say that is because when I introduced myself to the chief rabbi of Beit Shemesh, who was a Moroccan Rav, and I told him who my father was, then I really had to explain who my father was. He didn't really understand. But I was saying, so I learned. But the question is, it was about his Torah. Of course, everyone who knew him knew his love for every Jew, his devotion to Chesed. But people who didn't come in touch with him knew about his Torah. And what was it about his Torah that made him really so special and so world-renowned? So since we're we're about to finish Sefer Devarim, and I would assume that Simchas Torah on some level is devoted to Sefer Devarim. Maybe we'll take a few minutes to understand the nature of a Sefer Devarim. So the very beginning of Sefer Devarim, Perek Aleph, Pasuk Psukim Gimel, and Hey. So in Pasuk Gimel it says, Vayihi ba'arba'im shana b'ashtei asar chodesh v'echad lachodesh diber Moshe al bnei Yisrael kol asher tziva Hashem oto alehem. Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to bnei Yisrael everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded him. And then in Pasuk Hey it says, Ve'ever Yarhzeit ve'eretz Moab hu'il Moshe ve'eretz Torah zos more. So it says Moshe began to explain the Torah. So in Pasuk Gimel, in the third Pasuk of Sefer Devarim, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu gave over whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded. In the fifth Pasuk, the Torah says, Moshe began to explain. What is the difference in Pasuk Gimel, where Moshe gave over the mitzvahs of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Pasuk Hey, where Moshe Rabbeinu began to explain the Torah? So the Ramban, in the very beginning of Sefer Devarim, says like this: there are two things going on here. One thing is there are certain mitzvahs Moshe knew about, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him to give to Am Yisrael, and he had not as of yet given it to Am Yisrael, and therefore that's Pasuk Gimel. And Pasuk Gimel is the time, and it could be Achrei HaKosoah, he says, and that's why it says in Pasuk Gimel, Diber Moshe b'nei Yisrael chachar asher tziva Hashem oso aleihem. Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Bnei Yisrael everything that Hashem commanded, and it was time to give over these mitzvos. Now, why is it that these mitzvos were given over now, not before? There were certain mitzvos that were very specific to coming into Eretz Yisrael, coming when they were not in the Midbar, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu had to wait. All right, but in Pasuk Hey, there the Ramban says like this: that now Moshe was explaining the Torah, and he was adding certain pratim to the mitzvos, certain other ideas to the mitzvos, but he was explaining the Torah. And the Ramban says a very, very difficult lashon, which has to be explained. That's what I want to speak about. That Levar Torah, he says, V'kimei atzmo rotza lasos. Moshe by himself wanted to do this. V'lo tziva'u Hashem bazeh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not command him. So Ramban says is that what the Moshe Rabbeinu, Rav is talking about in Pasuk Hey, that Moshe Rabbeinu began to explain the Torah, that was his own initiative. HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not command him. Now this is a very, very difficult point. Why is this difficult? Because we know, if anyone says that one pasuk, one word does not come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it came just from Moshe Rabbeinu, right? The Gemara says he's not Pikoros. So Ramban is basically saying that all the Sefer Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu Atzmo Amar. So we have to understand this Ramban. Now, the Ramban didn't make it up. The Gemara Maseches Megillah basically says that point. The Gemara Maseches Megillah says, and the Gemara speaks about the Tochacha. So the Gemara says that when you read the Tochacha, you should not go ahead and make a break in the middle. You have to read the whole Tochacha together. The reason why, the Aharon explain, is because if you make a break in the middle, it makes it sound like you don't want to listen to the Musar of Hashem, so you should read it all at once. And then the Gemara says, that's only when it comes to the Tochacha and Sefer Vayikra. When it comes to the Tochacha and Sefer Devarim, there, Al Pidin, you're actually allowed to make a break in the middle. See, even though the minhag today, and the Ramah mentions, I believe Shulchan Aruch mentions, the minhag is that we don't make a break in the middle, but B'dinah the Gemara, you're allowed to have an aliyah in the middle of the Tochacha. Why? Because the Musar in Sefer Vayikra, that's Musar Hashem. The Musar in Sefer Devarim, that's from Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu, the Gemara says, Mipi Atzmo Amar. So what the Ramban says is not really only the Ramban, it's really Chazal, and therefore we have to go ahead and we have to explain this. Now it's obvious that Moshe Rabbeinu said this of Ruach HaKodesh, but still, to say Mipi Atzmo Amar, we have to understand what that means. So the Kli Chemda, he says that what he says everyone has to say, it goes like this. Basically, the way he points it out is that what happened, Moshe Mipi Atzmo Amar, before his death, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to him, and I'll explain this afterwards, Moshe, that was very good what you said, right? And I want you to write this down now. So what happened really was the Kli Chemda, Moshe initially said it by himself, but then HaKadosh Baruch Hu repeated Moshe Rabbeinu's words, and then it became part of the Torah. So when he says Mipi Atzmo Amar, it doesn't mean that Moshe Rabbeinu did it by himself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't say anything. Yeah, as we know, I'm sure over all the 40 years there were things that Moshe Rabbeinu said, that were not written in the Torah. They're not written in the Torah. However, this last Musar speech, this last Sicha that Moshe Rabbeinu gave, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I want written in the Torah. So it says Moshe Rabbeinu Atzmo Amar, that means initially Moshe Rabbeinu said it in his own. However, it was only later, afterwards, Hashem said to Moshe, that was very good, I think we should write in the Torah. So what happens? So when HaKadosh Baruch Moshe wrote the Torah down. What happened was HaKadosh Baruch would say it over to Moshe, and Moshe would say it again and say it while he was writing it. So after Moshe Rabbeinu went ahead and he gave the speech to Am Yisrael, according to the Chemda, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told over every single word again to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it down, not chas v'shalom that Moshe Rabbeinu came up with the whole idea on his own, he did everything on his own. Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu then told Moshe Rabbeinu to do it. Now, with this we can understand a Gemara in Maseches Yevamos. What does the Gemara in Maseches Yevamos speak about? The Gemara in Maseches Yevamos is there, so it begins on Daf Daled with the idea of asay docha lo sasay, that you know if you have an asay to do, a mitzvah asay, and at the same time you're going to go ahead and be over a los asay, so we say that the asay is docha, you can do the asay even though by doing the asay you're going to be over los asay. And what's the example? Midiaraisa, if a person is going ahead and he has a linen beged and he wants to pull in tchelis, which is out of wool, so he's allowed to put the tchelis into the woolen beged because the asay of gdilam taselacha, a linen bed, the asay of gdilam taselacha is docha the los asay of shatnus. And how do we know that? Very simple, because both psukim are mentioned together, smuchim. So in other words, so therefore when there's a juxtaposition, the Gemara says that we can learn out smuch. We can learn out smuchim. Whenever I use, obviously in this crowd, whenever I use the word juxtaposition, so people say to me, "Well, how do you know such fancy English?" My father used that word all the time, so that's how I learned my fancy English. But it's a juxtaposition. So Gemara moves on. The Gemara says, "Well, who says you can learn out smuchim in the Torah?" Rabbi Yehuda's shita is that you can't be doresh smuchim in the Torah. Why? Because ein muktam v'muchar b'Torah. There's no order. In other words, he says just because two psukim together, you're going to start learning a drasha out. I don't want to get into the details. It's all Gemara Maseches Yevamos. So the Gemara says, you know what? That's correct in the rest of the Torah. When it comes to Sefer Devarim, there we are doresh smuchim in Sefer Devarim. Why is that? The Gemara points out because either number one, it's muchach, or there's definitely an extra word there. The Metzias in Sefer Devarim is that it's open for drushas. You can be dorish. That's the Metzias. That's the Metzias in Sefer. That's the Metzias in Sefer Devarim. And Tosfos brings down a shita on Daf Daled, which I don't want to focus on in regard to Kachim, that we are dorish smuch in other parts of the Torah. And there goes Marav in Regensburg. So he quotes the Ravan. And what does the Ravan say? The Ravan says no. The only time that we are doresh, the only time that we can be doresh smuchim with Rabbi Yehuda is we're in Sefer Devarim. Why in Sefer Devarim? In Sefer Devarim because mipi atzmo amar, because Moshe Rabbeinu said mipi atzmo. And what does that mean? He said mipi atzmo. So the idea is like this. This is the way. And both my uncle Rav Chayim Soloveichik and my father Rav Chayim Soloveichik made reference to the Ramban. That why? Said since Moshe Rabbeinu said it over on himself, so therefore it's much more open to be doresh smuchim. What's the idea? My uncle explained that what really is Sefer Devarim. This is very important. Sefer Devarim, as the Ramban says, is an explanation of the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu on his own wanted to go over and he wanted to explain the he wanted to go ahead and he wanted to explain the rest. He wanted to go ahead and he wanted to explain the rest of the Torah. He wanted to explain the rest of the Torah. So that's Sefer Devarim. So Sefer Devarim, in a certain sense, when Moshe Rabbeinu told it over, it was like Torah Shebal Peh. It was Torah Shebal Peh of the rest of the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to go and say it over. And therefore, if you're going to go ahead and you're going to say over Torah Shebal Peh, you're going to say over Torah Shebal Peh, obviously you have to do it in a way where it's open for drash, and Moshe Rabbeinu did it that way, so therefore he did it in a way where juxtapositions will be used for drash, because the whole thing was an explanation of the rest of the Torah, and therefore since it's the rest of the Torah, it was written in a way, it was said over in a way where you can be dorish things. For that reason, we can dorish Sefer Devarim, something you cannot be dorish in a way you can't be dorish in the rest of the Torah. Now I'll tell you a fascinating idea, just similar to this. It starts with a story, but I heard something this year that just blew me away. So many years ago, when one of my nephews became bar mitzvah, it was after my father had a stroke. And as you know, my father didn't use an Eruv, and he couldn't, for one bar mitzvah, so he was able to stay at a house near the shul, and he walked. He was able to walk. But the next bar mitzvah was a little more difficult to walk, and so my father had to stay in the shul. Okay, where does the shul have a place to stay? So the shul had a mikveh, okay, and the mikveh had a couch, all right? So my father slept on the couch that night, right? So my being the youngest child in the family, even though I was married with children, I had the schus. I was given the schus, which I readily agreed to, of course, of staying with my father that night in the shul. So my father slept on the couch. I must have slept on a mattress or some blankets. It was fine. Okay, it was right before Purim actually, and the next day, after lunch, everyone went home. I went with my father down so he could rest, but he didn't really rest. He was talking to me. Then he says to me, I remember this clearly, he says to me, Chaim, he says, there's one Rambam I don't understand. Now, my father says to me, there's one Rambam he doesn't understand. There's one Rambam he doesn't understand. So I said, what Rambam is it? He says, the Rambam at the very end of Hilchos Megillah, where the Rambam says that La'asid Lavo, all the Sifrei Nevi'im Uksuvim become batal, except for Megillah Esther. He says, I don't understand how can it be that the Rambam could say a thing like that, and Megillah Esther is different than the rest of the Svarim, and it won't become batal, and the other Svarim will become batal. So it happened, was my mazel, that my brother spoke about my father's relation with Rav Hutner. I happened to have learned the Maimer from Rav Hutner, Pachad Yitzchak, on that Rambam. So I said to my father, I said, I actually learned a piece from Rav Hutner on that Rambam. So he says to me, tell me what he says. And Rav Hutner says that, like this, that you see, really, all of the Nevi'im Miksuvim is very important. It's really an explanation of the rest of the Torah. There are so many ideas in the Torah that we'll never really understand from the Torah itself. It's deep in the Torah. So the Nevi'im and Ksuvim came along. If Yeshaya Navi explains the mitzvah of oneg and kavod, it's all in the Torah based on Shomer v'Zachar. So the Nevi'im have to come along and sort of elaborate so we can understand the Torah more. But in the future, we'll be Mala Kol Haaretz Deya, and we'll understand everything. Won't we need the Nevi'im anymore? We can learn the Torah by itself about the Nevi'im. So therefore, there will not be a need for the Nevi'im and the Ksuvim. But Megillas Esther, that in itself is not an explanation of the Torah. That is sort of like Torah itself, because I guess it's a historical event, and therefore the mitzvah is based on that historical event. So my father looks at me, and he says, that's a very nice shot. I like it. Okay, so at that age I said, you always want to feel that you think that, you told your father something, he's proud of you, get a little nachas, okay? Got some brownie points. I'm not sure if I spoke about it back then. I was proud of it years later. So, a number of weeks ago, I was speaking to one of my nephews about this story, and he says, what do you mean, he says? I was looking at someone's notes when Zaidi was in Chai in Berlin. I took notes, and he discussed the Rambam, right? And that's the pshat Zaidi gave on the Rambam. Right? That's the pshat. A certain idea that certain ideas that you learn are deep, and sometimes you have to remember it. So he liked his own shot that he gave. Okay, why am I telling this to you? Besides, it's a wonderful story, and I have brownie points. But he says, the reason I tell the story is because that's the idea. The idea of Sefer Nevuim Ksuvim is like Torah Shebal Peh. And Sefer Devarim also is like Torah Shebal Peh. And that's why Sefer Devarim is written in a way you can be Dorish Smuchim. And then what happened? So, that's why Sefer Devarim is very different, and that's shot in the Ramban. My father added one word to this. My father said, when he taught Mesachas Yevamos, that Moshe Rabbeinu asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu to include in the Torah. So it wasn't only that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe, that was a good shiur. Moshe Rabbeinu asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu to write in the Torah. Because Moshe Rabbeinu wanted the Jews to understand how important Biur HaTorah is. Biur HaTorah is not just an idea the Torah is not just you have reading Psukim Masari. No, but when you learn Torah and say Torah, you have to really understand it. That's what Sefer Devarim teaches us. As we come into past Sukkot, it's not just enough to learn. We have to go ahead and we have to understand and explain. We have to understand and explain the Torah. So, if I want to speak of my father, I think one thing, well, many things, but one of the ideas he was very good at is when he would explain a Gemara, he would explain a halacha. There was no one that gave a svara in Gemara like he did. The way he can give over a simple shot in the Gemara. I just want to finish off with two stories. One story I heard from David Applebaum, Hashem Yikam Damo, and it was about me. I don't remember the story. So he told me that once at Simchas Torah, I guess there was a lot of dancing going along, and I was very bothered by Akasha. He said, I think you were in second grade. Why? So I don't know if you have it here, but he described for me how the whole conversation with my father went. He says, you went over to your father, and you were very bothered. Why? Because you showed your father in the siddur, when they'd say Kiddush on Friday night, there's these small words, Vayi Erev, Vayi Voker. And you said to your father, Abba, you don't say the words in the siddur. And for a second-year-old, if you're talking to your father, who might be a Gadol Ador, and might know all the Shas and the Torah, but if it's in the siddur, you don't say it, he's obviously doing something wrong. As a matter of fact, it's almost as bad as Chilul Shabbos from the perspective of a second grader. So my father says, he says, let me see what you're referring to. So he takes the siddur, and he says, because it's written by Erev Vayi Boker in the siddur. And I don't say that, right? It's correct, your question? So I said, yeah, it's my question. So David Applebaum said to me, he says, you cannot understand what happened afterwards. He sat there for 15 minutes explaining to you the whole idea of Kol Psuke de Lo Paske Moshe. He says, you're a second grader. You could have just said, that's my minhag, right? But no. He sat there and he made sure you understand. He had to go ahead and he had to explain it to you. The idea of Biur HaTorah is so important. One more story. So as my brother Rav Moshe mentioned, towards the end of my life, for various reasons, my father started saying Tehillim. Really, the reason why, if I remember correctly, why he started saying Tehillim, was he started saying Tehillim when my nephew became sick, Yisrael Yosef. And then after my nephew passed away, he continued saying Tehillim. And my father could say Tehillim once, sometimes twice a day, right? And then he'd prepare shiur too. And by the way, sometimes he'd learn Daf Yomi also. It wasn't a problem. He had no problem giving shiur. Anyways, it bothered my mother a little bit. Because, my mother always understood my father as a person who sat and learned Gemara, Rishonim. He was saying Tehillim. So she used to say to me, Chaim, give Abba Gemara, okay? Now, I can't tell you how uncomfortable I felt, what I'm saying? So I'd come, I said, Abba, maybe you want a Gemara now, So father would tell me exactly what you want, and that was it. It was over. A number of years later, my father was here in Eretz Yisrael, and he spoke at the Ramana Renaissance. I don't know if everyone remembers the shiur. It was a shiur, and he spoke about about the Yonah, and he says it was a shiur on Sefer Tehillim, and it was lumdus on Sefer Tehillim. So after the shiur, I went up to my father. I said, that was a great shiur, like lumdus on Tehillim. And he looks at me and he says, what do you think? I was saying Tehillim. I was learning Tehillim. The idea of learning Torah with biur was very important to him. That's Sefer Devarim. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu did it, and that's why Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to be part of the Torah. Because Moshe Rabbeinu wanted that people should understand the significance of what it is to learn of a biur, to understand, and not just to learn, but to try to go ahead and try to understand, and really to plunge to the depths. It didn't mean that my father did not like learning Bekiyas. He did, sometimes also. I remember when I was 17 years old, I didn't check it up to him. Please don't check it out on me, but I think I was 17, and the Daf Yomi was learning Zvachim. And he said to me, let's learn Daf Yomi together. We'll learn 2 weeks together until you have to go away. You would stop. But he was so excited about learning Daf Yomi with me for 2 weeks. He was so excited. He says, but whatever you learn, whatever level, it's very important to have the biur to understand, to explain. That's the point of Sefer Devarim. And that's a message we should keep with us as we start Sefer Bereshis, to really, whatever we learn, that to always try to understand on some level we learn, not just to say we learned.